Coming up on Fresh Freedom, episode 41, our special guest, Chris Piotta, who spent 25 years in the FBI, gives his insight as Director Kash Patel attempts to make sweeping changes to an agency in desperate need of one. Welcome to the Fresh Freedom Podcast, featuring freedom-focused representatives who are fighting for your conservative values and defending your constitutional rights. I'm Nate Lucas, joined as always by Representative Eric Burleson from Missouri, and our special guest is Chris Piotta. Mr. Piotta retired from the FBI as one of the organization's 8 most senior executives after serving nearly 25 years as a supervisory special agent who led global national security programs and oversaw sensitive technical operations across the law enforcement and intelligence communities. Since retiring, Mr. Piotta has served as an executive leader, subject matter expert, consultant, and speaker, and most recently had his first book published in November of 2024. Gentlemen, it's great to be with you. Welcome to Fresh Freedom.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here and a pleasure to meet with you and your audience.
Welcome. So I'm excited to hear about your book, but I'm sure you've got some questions to start us off.
Yeah, I just think we're watching sweeping changes across, bureaucracies in the federal government, and maybe the FBI is one that desperately needing a cleanse. And to see someone like Director Kash Patel get nominated for this position and have a chance to go in there and restore it to maybe what you lived through 25 years and watched it change, I would imagine, it's encouraging at least.
Well, I think we have an atmosphere of change, to say the least, right now with the current administration. And I think that Mr. Patel has his work cut out for him. The FBI has drifted away from many of its historical values and practices and beliefs. And the FBI we have now is not the FBI that the American people want or need for the future. So I think Mr. Patel, like I said, he's got his work cut out for him. One of the things I would like to see him look at is the formation of that senior leadership team inside the Bureau to support him and the deputy director, because that's going to be one of his most important strategic decisions, is how he's going to form that team.
It's interesting when you get into an agency in that position, like, can you know everything overnight? I mean, there are going to be Trojan horses that are embedded in these organizations that you're going to have to weed through. But I would think that these 10 years when you're appointed or nominated, they're 10 years. And 10 years seems like maybe a long time, but the reality is to get in there and have change and then make sure that change sticks around, that takes some time.
It's going to take him some time, but I don't think he has time. Right now, the FBI is in a state where he's got to look at 3 areas at him as the primary strategic leader for the organization. He's got to look at 3 areas in my mind. He's got to look at the culture that exists right now. The FBI culture that exists right now is not, it's deficient. It's not adequate. And it's not the FBI that I grew up in, where the FBI was apolitical, it was objective, it was stoic, and it was professional in everything that it did. He's got to look at that culture. Second thing he's got to do is look at the leadership environment that exists. We've seen the FBI involved in questionable operations over the past several years. We've also seen the FBI make some decisions that were, again, highly questionable by the American people and our national leadership. Third area he has to look at as a strategic leader is the operational practices of the FBI. Is it doing what it says it's doing, and is it doing what it's supposed to be doing for the American people? If he allows himself to get caught up in minutia when he walks in the door, like you said, there's going to be mountains of things that he has to learn about and become part of, but he can't allow himself to be just submerged in minutia, because then he's going to fight that battle every day, all day. And that's what he needs, that leadership team I just spoke of, for, so that he can give direction, he can give vision, he can set expected outcomes. And then he has a team that will execute his wishes and bring back status and bring back reports of progress.
So I'm interested in hearing what year did you begin, and kind of what was the culture at that time and the reputation of the FBI, and how is that? How have you seen that change over time?
I entered onto duty with the FBI in 1995. It was July of 1995.
When I graduated high school.
So I entered onto duty with the Bureau. I was working at the Kennedy Space Center. I was working in the space shuttle program. And
Oh, very cool.
it was awesome. But we saw that program had kind of reached its peak. And every time it took off, of course, we were scared to death because of some of the accidents that had happened. And every time it returned to Earth, we were scared to death.
You're missing tiles every time.
It wasn't a great thing. And we would wait for it to come back, and we'd hear the two sonic explosions when it re-entered the atmosphere, and then we would watch for it. And then it would, well, they say it flew, but it actually fell out of the sky. And then we watched it come gliding in, and we used to joke about it. It was kind of like playing Frisbee with a manhole cover. This thing was not an aircraft. It fell out of the sky in a controlled manner.
Right. Almost like a turkey.
Exactly. It came in, it didn't fall flat, but it came in hard and fast.
Yeah.
So, but what I did was I had been in the military for 6 years before I worked in the space shuttle program. So I wanted to get back to a service-oriented career, and I was looking into law enforcement, and I was actually going to go back in the military. I was looking at possibly going back into the Army. I was in the Army National Guard at the time. So, but I applied to the FBI, and they had come out of a hiring freeze, joined in 95. I was fortunate. They called me on a Monday and said, "Are you still interested?" I said, "Of course." And then they said, "Can you be here this Sunday?" I said, "Of course." Right? So then I had to call my wife and tell her what I just did.
Sunday, that's interesting.
Yes. So I had a week to resign from my job, leave the Florida National Guard. I was in the officer candidate program, pack up all my things, tell my kids I'd be gone for 16 weeks, and then drive to Quantico that Saturday.
Oh, wow.
So that's what started my 25-year career, and ended up retiring in January of 2020 after, like I said, a great 25 years. If they'd let me do it, I'd go back and do it again.
So when you first came in, what was the culture? What was, you had probably a lot of guys that were kind of instilling, what were the values at that time?
There were still some older guys who wore the fedoras.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Right? Most of the guys didn't wear fedoras anymore. We still had a few of the older guys who still wore fedoras.
I kind of think we ought to go back to wearing hats. Like you watch some of the old movies, and men always would, you step outside, you put a hat on. I think we ought to somehow get back to that time.
Still had them. Still had a few. They were still hanging around. And the culture was one more of, we were that premier law enforcement organization. We were the FBI, right? And the older folks, not older, but like I call them the old breed of agents, the senior folks, they took their jobs very seriously. They were the protectors of America, basically. And when I was coming in, I saw these people, and you watch the movies, and they were the dragon slayers, right? That everybody wanted to be. And when I got there, I got to meet some of these people in real life. They were serious, no nonsense people, demanded high standards and performance, didn't tolerate any whining or sniveling about things. And you were a new person, and you were there to learn and listen and keep your mouth shut, basically. And they taught us how to be FBI agents.
So is it kind of like a culture that's similar to the military in some regard?
There's a rank structure in the FBI, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's paramilitary like you would find in a police organization or the sheriff's office and that.
Right.
It's more of a management structure because they have so many people from different backgrounds. They had to figure out how to govern those personnel and processes and investigations in a way that brought the accountability, gave respect to the rank structures for command and control, but it wasn't overly like paramilitary.
And then throughout the years, what were some of those like pivotal moments or red flag moments where you stepped back and thought, this is not the FBI that I came into?
What happened was I was in the Newark, New Jersey field office at 9/11. And when the tragedy of 9/11 happened, I knew we had our tails kicked. Right? The adversary was better than we were. They had better planning, better execution. And we as an organization, and I blame no one for this, this was just the operating environment of the time. We were still a reactive law enforcement organization primarily. But we failed to see the operational horizon. We didn't see that as being a possibility on any level.
Right? Were there ever any indicators? I mean, I think this is something that one of the things that was brought up I'm on the disclosure task force. that people want to look into what happened on 9/11. It's one of the conspiracies is that there were some reports or things that we overlooked.
I will say that there were some documents and reports that were not given vision to look into the future for possibility. You'll see like the Phoenix Flight School memos and things like that were written. I mean, I knew the guy personally who wrote it. Right? Nobody had the vision to see that they were going to use the aircraft as weapons.
Okay.
We knew it was odd.
Nobody connected the dots to figure out what
there
was
were
happening.
no dots at the time. We didn't even create the dots.
Okay.
So I think the problem was we had a model of terrorism, and that's what we stuck with.
Yeah.
And we didn't look forward to say how could they further weaponize, because the model at the time was hijack, ask for political demands, ask for money. A release of some of my colleagues.
Yeah.
And largely it was an overseas problem.
And it was mostly like negotiation.
Correct.
You guys had a lot of people trained to.
Oh, we have some of the best negotiators there are, and that's what we did. And they had an outcome they were looking for. It the 9/11 folks did not.
Right.
And when you see a young man from the Middle East who says, "I don't need to learn how to land,"
yeah,
you think, well, don't think much of it at that time, but now our perspective's different. So we had a different model of terrorism, and again, the FBI. Terrorism was a low priority program. It was mostly seen as an overseas issue. It was in Oconus manner. But they brought it home to us. They took it to us. And that was one of the watershed moments for me. It was when the FBI started to change. It was violently shifted from a reactive law enforcement organization to what we see the outcome of now, which would be that more predictive, proactive, national security, domestic security agency. And the FBI went through a very violent, I would call it again, shift in its culture and how it saw itself, how it did things, in its priorities.
So in a way, I'll use these words, in somewhat, this is the criticism, it's become a surveillance state, right?
Well,
that we had the FISA debate each year. And we know that the FBI has had a history the last few years of violating, the FISA laws. And but at the end of the day, the question, I think their goal was to try to preempt and try to get ahead of it.
And
but the problem is they're violating people's rights.
Well, the part of the challenge, and I said this to somebody recently, in our government systems, there's an incentive structure that most things in the government start out with good intentions. Like all things. But what I've seen over the years is that the incentive structure starts out and some is good, so more must be better, and then too much is just right. And I think that's where we drifted when you're looking at surveillance. We have to preempt, to predict, we have to be anticipatory. And then once you see you have some success, well, then we have to do that more, of course. And then we drift again. Without that principled leadership, without the self-constraint that the FBI used to have, we end up in a state where maybe we're using those authorities too much. We're overusing them. People say abuse. I saw overuse in many instances. I had a conversation with a colleague of mine one time, and we were looking at a potential threat, and he goes, "Hey, are you doing a FISA package?" I said, "No." He goes, "Why not?" I said, "Because we don't have predication." Because you still have to have predication for certain technical surveillance and gathering of certain data. And that became the mentality, is everything that happened, you had to have a FISA up. And when I was coming up, the old guard would say, "No, you don't have enough for that. You better get out and do some real agent work if you want to put a FISA collection up." Right? They would actually tell you. But then later what happened is the heads of the field offices became graded on how many extraordinary investigative techniques they had in place in their office. So if it affects the boss's rating, you're going to go out and you're going to figure out how to get some of these investigative techniques. And that was something that had happened over time. And, again, the culture being, hey, we have to protect versus we have to succeed. led to some of these. Again, like I said, I don't like the word abuse. I think there were some bad decisions made, but the overuse of some of those authorities.
Interesting.
Do you get the sense that maybe the credibility of the FBI has been hurt in recent years? I mean, we've heard stories of them going after parents in school board meetings. Catholics have been targeted. We've heard that domestic terrorists, whether, January 6 individuals, they seem to be targeting Americans, and then yet they continuously miss maybe some red flags with those who come and actually commit violence and commit mass shootings. And it's like, you seem so focused, hyper-focused, the agency does, on a political agenda set by an administration that they're missing the most obvious violent criminals amongst us.
That's a great observation. The FBI, when I watched this over the past several years, they lost what they used to have, which I would consider a steel backbone, where they couldn't resist the political influence or the political expectations anymore, where the FBI used to be able to resist that better. They would navigate it better. Someone said, was the FBI 100% apolitical? The answer is no. You cannot be apolitical in Washington, D.C. But they were better at navigating it. They were better at resisting influence or expectation, and they were better at conducting an objective apolitical assessment of the threat environment, where the FBI had turned its attention inward toward domestic security threats with the homegrown violent extremists and domestic issues. We allowed a separate threat environment to develop concurrently, where we were hyper-focused on our own people, and we had people pouring in across the borders, unvetted, unvalidated people who are here not for the benefit of our communities, right? I think the FBI also, over the past several years, lost its core mission focus. The core mission of the FBI, well, in its own words, the mission of the FBI is to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. And they do that by what I consider to be a core mission set of activities, which is to combat and defeat national security threats and crime problems. That's how they do that. And the last iteration of the FBI and the leadership that was theirs succumbed to the expectations of the administration, and they did not. I think it was a misuse of priority and resources. I'll leave it there.
What will happen when Mr. Musk and his team come into the FBI and DOJ starts trying to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse? Because I would imagine, like every other agency they've walked inside of, there is a ton of that.
I think what you're going to see at the FBI, it has a fairly decent budget now, thanks to the national leadership. It used to be more of I would say, a poverty operation when I first joined, but their resources have been considerably enhanced over the years. And of course, when that happens, you'll see some pet projects. You'll see certain pet programs. Certain programs are maybe more enhanced than others. So I think that's where you'll see DOJ come in and immediately say, well, why do we have 100 people here? Why do we have? Because there's some of those programs I believe can be consolidated, combined, or maybe eliminated. I've seen them across the Hoover Building because I spent a lot of time there, unfortunately. There are divisions out in the FBI operational space that I'll use the one in West Virginia, for example. They could probably use a DOJ visit they can enhance a lot of their operations for efficiency and effectiveness with advanced technology. That those skill sets and those perspectives probably don't exist in the FBI right now. So when they go out and they do an assessment, they may be able to say, you can save X number of dollars, time, whatever, by doing this. We'll help you do this. So you're going to see a lot of that. But what I found out and what was interesting when I got to senior level in the organization is that most of the FBI's budget is spent on personnel costs.
Yeah.
Most of it, people think that we have all this money sitting around for all this cool stuff that we do. And basically, when I got there and I saw the budget, I was like, wow, how many, we pay what? And most of it's personnel costs. So I think that in and of itself is it may not be as DOJ capable of being realigned, but I think the FBI does have some areas for enhanced efficiency. I've seen it myself, and I think that the Doge folks will have some great ideas.
Are you a fan of the new the new headquarters and getting rid of the J. Edgar Hoover building?
No.
Okay.
No. I think it's a mistake. I think that
Love this.
Yeah.
I want to hear more.
I think the FBI as an entity and the purpose that it serves for the U.S. government and the American people must be in Washington, D.C. It's right across the street from the Department of Justice, which is its superior organizational component, and it's close to the White House, the Hill, and our national leadership.
Mm-hmm.
To move the FBI wherever it ends up at some point, I think it'll remove them from certain processes, discussions, and potentially planning that won't make for better. And if you start moving too many things to Huntsville, Alabama, you're going to take the FBI out of a lot of operational environments that it should be in. We used to have some pretty, I would say, enthusiastic and forceful arguments when I was still there about what would move to Huntsville and what wouldn't. And, there's some things that we do that we should be in the D.C. area. And folks didn't understand that until we had to explain it to them very crisply about certain activities that we support.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we support the national leadership. I think Huntsville is a great resource for the Bureau. Doge may want to show up there too. So,
Sounds good.
Yeah.
You hinted on it a little bit, but being on the declassification task force and all of the news with the rollout, the strange rollout, you could call it that, of the Epstein files and some of the other objectives of the task force. I mean, one of the neat things I think of this administration is that they appear to want to provide transparency and accountability. Do you think we'll ever actually see these files or some version of these files?
My opinion?
Yeah.
You'll see some, not all, because there still will be parts of information that are not for public consumption. It's inevitable that there will be certain.
When you say let's like parse that.
Sure.
So victims lists, we can all agree.
That's correct.
The list of victims, we want to protect their names. But when you say, is there more beyond that, or things that would not be for public consumption?
I will just say this. I'm speculating because I was not part of that investigation, so I didn't have a lot of insight into exactly how it was conducted. But if there are certain counterintelligence concerns, maybe, that would be of interest to the U.S. government, they would not be divulged.
So explain that to someone who's not familiar with
any areas where the United States government can gain advantage over maybe some of its international competitors based upon information that it found in that investigation.
Oh, okay. So you're saying if we found information about maybe a foreign individual, okay. Wow. That would be, and that's just, you're speculating.
I'm speculating.
Okay.
Based upon the nature of the reported activities there and some of the assumed relationships of the people involved, right? Again, I'm looking at open source news media. But that's what I'm saying. Is certain things like that may not be able to be divulged.
So when you've got a situation, you watched what happened. You have Pam Bondi who said she's going to release it, and then she finds out that the field office in New York has not released that, or is sitting on, according to her, thousands of documents.
Right.
How does that functionally operate? How does that relationship work?
Well, the AG is the boss. The AG puts out a record request or a request for information. The field offices respond in whatever timeline she provides. In this instance, I think some of the information that I saw in the news media has been a little bit muddled, because you hear some terminology put out there that some of the documents are in the possession of the Southern District of New York, which would be the U.S. Attorney's Office. Other people are referencing the FBI office as the Southern District of New York FBI, which is, there's no such thing.
Okay.
And we have to look and see who has what data. And if the FBI did not provide certain documents, were they duplicates? Because that happened when I was around for the Oklahoma City bombing. And the FBI was accused of not providing all the documentation that had to do with Oklahoma City and that incident. So they put out a data call, and a bunch of stuff came in. And once the review was done, it was seen that nothing new or nothing that was considered to be exculpatory or inculpatory was found, right? But they were duplicate documents.
Right.
And when they're trying to deduplicate, they don't just send everything in. They try to say, this is the unique document. We have copies in the field office for whatever file purposes. That's what you're looking at potentially. And I'll say this, if there were officials in the FBI who were slow rolling this or somehow impeded the accomplishment of it, they should be identified and dealt with accordingly.
So is the agency still operating, this is going to be in the weeds, but you guys are operating on paper, or do you scan these in and keep, because like there's version management software and the industry uses for document management solutions?
Most everything done in the FBI now that the FBI generates reports is done in a digital fashion. Okay. Most that would be the rule. The exception would be where you have solely a paper document. And a lot of times that is because we collected that as evidence.
I can see if the document itself should be evidence because of where it was found or this or that.
But even then they'll scan, wherever they can, they'll scan it so you have a digital image.
Right. One of the things that's fascinating to me, and I'm taking over the questions here, but is that, we had the situation in oversight when we were investigating Hunter Biden, and we ended up having, we had a whistleblower from the FBI talk to Senator Grassley's office, talk to Jamie Comer, said that there is a document. I can't remember what it was, like a 1023 document where that was about an informant who was calling in on a regular basis and was providing some information about Hunter and something that was going on with Ukraine and Burisma. And when we requested that document, when the senator requested that document, when the House requested that document, we were told the document doesn't exist. And then basically they had to reveal that they had a copy that had been given to them by a whistleblower. And at that point, the FBI said, oh, that document.
Oh, what we meant to say was, right. Yeah. I just think, to me, that's also a sign of the cultural shift in the organization, where my opinion was, and I've testified up on the Hill, I've talked to various rooms full of senators and congressional members, and I never found a time where I was adversarial, or I was never adversarial, but that would have been helped by being adversarial or standoffish. Mm-hmm. And I think the Bureau's attitude on that changed over the past several years, maybe a little bit before I left, where they started being less amenable to showing certain documents to our national leadership. Cultural change, not for the better. And I think that once this instance that you spoke of happened and they had to come out and say, oh, well, we actually do have that. It just, again, decreases the trust and confidence in the organization that used to be the standard for trust and confidence. And again, the leadership allowed that to happen. The senior leadership allowed that to happen. And shame.
Yeah. Wow.
Convenient how they decided to disclose that they actually had those documents well after the election had occurred, I might add, too.
Well, I'll tell you, what happened to Director Comey scared a lot of people. And when the election cycle came around again, they all decided what are we going to do here? Because they had a couple of elephants in the room that they had to deal with, and they decided to do nothing. Well, not making a choice is still a choice, in my opinion. And they decided not to choose. They sat on some things. They decided not to. They said they didn't want to influence the outcome of the election, which they did anyway by not making a choice. My opinion, and this is solely my personal opinion, is that wasn't the FBI's choice to make.
Mm-hmm. You're referring to the Hunter Biden laptop and all that information.
Correct. That you take that to the Attorney General. That's their decision, not the FBI's. Again, personal opinion.
Fascinating. Well, one thing that's cool about working for Mr. Burleson is that I think his intentions are genuine. And I've told you before we started, I listened to several podcasts that you've appeared on, and I just get the sense that you're passionate about this agency, and to see where it's drifted today from when you first started as a great opportunity to be involved in help at an agency. I would imagine that's frustrating. So I appreciate your intent to at least try to steer it back to respectability.
Would you consider going back if Cash asked you?
Sure.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Hopefully Cash is a viewer of this podcast.
Well, I would go back for a couple of reasons. One, I love the FBI. I spent 25 years of my life there, and I met some of the most incredible people, and I did some of the most incredible things that you can only do in that life. So it was a great organization, still could be. Once again, I think, like I said, Mr. Patel's going to have his hands full. He needs people around him who can not only provide counsel on certain things that I can see happening again. They're happening again after 9/11. There were some things that happened.
Mm-hmm.
I can see them happening again now. And no one's left. Everybody timed out. So he doesn't have people in the building to say, hey, sir, I've seen what we did last time and it led to these challenges. Maybe if you would, let's consider some other alternatives or courses of action. He may not have those people available. He needs people also to know, to sit with him as a new director, not having intimate knowledge in the organization. So if we're sitting across a table and I'm looking at these people and they start telling me things, I can tell them, stop. I know that's not true. I know this is how things work.
Yeah, that would be good.
And
that would be good counsel to have right there with you.
And I know that we can do better. So let's try again. He, on the other hand, may not know the depth of certain things, or when they come out and say, well, that's not true, I'm going to say, why not? Because this is how we should be doing things. There are three things that, there are three things that I tell him what I would tell him to do is say, sir, we got to look at three things. One, what is the FBI required to do? By law, by statute, by policy, by whatever. What are they required to do? Let's make sure we're doing that. Mm-hmm. Second thing is you got to look at what should the FBI be doing? What should they be doing right now to protect the American people, uphold the Constitution, to fight those national security?
Yeah, what's the priorities?
And the crime problems. What should they be doing?
Mm-hmm.
The third thing is, what does the American public and our national leadership expect from the FBI? They're not all three the same. So if we can answer those three questions, I think we'll be in much better shape versus just kind of more of the same. And we've already seen we don't want more of the same.
So when you went about writing your book, was there, what has been the feedback from some of your colleagues?
Oh, well, I think last time my wife is my chief operations officer, right? Last time she looked on Amazon, I only had 2 1-star reviews. And I think those people might know who they are in the book. But mostly it's been widely popular. A lot of folks are saying, thank you for writing. Mm-hmm. Thank you for telling the story. You're sharing your experience. A lot of folks are writing and saying, I had the same experiences as a new guy or a new lady, and then what happened to the Bureau and how we can get it back. They all think it's possible. A lot of the, a couple of the, real old timers that are still around kind of told me, they said, thanks for, giving us the nod. But like I told them, hey, they were the dragon slayers that we all watched as kids growing up, and they were the FBI and, a bunch of really stern looking folks in dark suits. And, and you knew when you, one of the things I'll tell you is when you call down the lightning, and the FBI shows up, that's when you knew you really kind of made a mistake, right? And that's the way it's got to become again. I told somebody this, and I'll close with this. The FBI operates and exists in a duality of existence. On one side of a coin, the FBI should be a fearsome, snarling guard dog that scares our adversaries and criminals to death. Mm-hmm. On the other side of that coin, the FBI should be that same dog, but I have no problem watching that dog lay on the floor and play with my kids.
Yeah.
And I also know that if any danger was to get close to those kids, that dog would protect them with its life. That's the FBI that we need back.
The nation's guard dog.
But that's what that's what we need back.
That is really good stuff. We can keep going, but we appreciate your time.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. And
thank you for your service to our country.
Yeah.
No, it was a pleasure. Like I told you, I'd go back and do it all again.
Excellent.
I hope you do.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. Great insight. You can catch Fresh Freedom on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, X, and Rumble. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Stand strong, stay informed, and keep fighting for freedom.